Donati and Jerry Kill available here. And so we're going to start with TCU Director of Intercollegiate Athletics, Jeremiah Donati.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks everyone for being here. Appreciate you coming on short notice to visit with me. I'll make a few opening remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions before I turn it over to Coach Dill. These last few days have been really tough. Tough on all of us here in the athletics department, tough on the TCU community. You know, it's frankly, it's a place that was almost kind of unimaginable not too long ago, and so it's just I acknowledge and recognize that it's been a tough time the last 48 hours for all of our Horned Frogs out there, but I promise you there are brighter days to come. Gary Patterson is a TCU icon. He's built this football program. He's helped build this university, this community, and we're forever indebted to his incredible contributions to Fort Worth, to TCU athletics, and to TCU football. But he's more than an icon. He's a friend, he's a colleague, and he and Kelsey are family. They always will be. And not just to TCU, again, to the entire Fort Worth community. As our press release said, Chancellor Boschini and I met with Gary on Sunday and informed him we'd be making a head coaching change at the end of the season. We told him that he would always have a place here at TCU, and then we wanted him to remain within the athletics department in another capacity. As soon as we had come to this decision, we wanted to let Coach know right away. We felt that was the fair thing to do. Out of respect for Gary, we did not want to engage in the search firm without sharing our plans first. We felt that was fair. It wouldn't be fair, rather, to do that. As you all know, the early signing period, December 15th, you've really got to get a head start on what your coaching situation looks like before you get in there. And we felt like letting Gary know as soon as our decision was made was the right course of action. Ultimately, Gary thought that it was in the best interest of the team and the university for him to step away now rather than coach through the end of the season. And he told us that he would prefer to explore other options rather than playing a new and different role within the university, and so we mutually agreed to part ways at that point. I respect his decision and his judgment and what he felt was best for this transition, best for his team, which he made very clear was the most important thing, and ultimately for the school. So that afternoon we negotiated the broad strokes of an acceptable agreement that would release him from his contract and allow him to step away immediately. And after that moment I asked Coach Jerry Kill to step in on the interim duty, which he gracefully accepted. We're still working through that agreement, so it's not appropriate this time to make any further comments on what that agreement looks like. But I would tell you that Coach he's been unbelievable in this transition. He's shown a ton of class and professionalism. This has not been easy for any of us, and so I'm just very grateful to him for the way in which he's handled that. And I would just leave on this. On a personal note, you know, I'm very grateful to Gary for the time we've had together. I've enjoyed 10 years working with him side by side, 4 years in the current role. But I think he'd agree that we've had a good working relationship, and I'll miss that. We've had some great times together, and so I know I speak for the entire TCU community when I say that to he and Kelsey that we'll miss them, but we know they won't be far, and ultimately we wish them the very best. So at this point, I'll take questions.
Jeremiah, Gary was viewed as untouchable, kind of as you alluded to. At what point did you realize that a change had to be made?
Well, I think I would start probably at the beginning of the season and say that we had very high expectations for this year, and I think we all, Gary included, felt that this was going to be somewhat of a bounce back year. We know that the last few years have been subpar based on the standards that Gary set for this program, and so I'd tell you that probably mid-October was when it became apparent that we weren't going to meet those expectations, and so we started the conversation about what that would look like potentially. So I don't have an exact date, but I would tell you that probably mid-October.
Jeremiah, when you say that he's exploring other options, do you expect him to coach somewhere else?
He certainly could. I mean, if you all know Gary, he's a young 61, and I wouldn't put anything past Coach Patterson to coach again in college, pro. I know he has a lot of other interests too, and so, you know, I hope he takes some time to think about what he wants to do, because he's got a lot to offer the game of football, and I don't think that, you know, that's over necessarily.
JD, when do you hope to have a replacement named by? Do you have a timeline for that?
Well, it has to be early December, as I mentioned earlier. Whereas, you know, before a few years ago when they changed the early signing period, you could wait till after bowl season and talk with coaches. And one of the reasons we informed Gary now was because we need to have a head coach in early December. We need someone in place, staff in place to be there to talk to recruits as we get to December 15th, which is the early signing period start. This is when it starts.
With Jeremiah, with recruiting so vital, is there any discussion of keeping any of those guys currently on staff around?
Well, we have some good coaches, and they will be, the new head coach will have ultimately, you know, authority to retain who he wants to retain, and to bring in, you know, his own staff. So we've got a lot of good coaches, coaches that I'm very have strong feelings for to retain. But ultimately, and I can share that with the new coach, but ultimately that's going to be his call.
You talked about not meeting certain goals. Do these goals now change? Are you playing catch up to those old goals, or are you starting from zero?
No, we're not starting from zero. That's a credit to Gary. I mean, this is not, you know, it's been 21 years since someone stood in front of this group talking about coaching change in football. What he's built a top 10 program, and the interest we're receiving already, you know, indicates that. So this is not a rebuild. Someone's going to be able to come in here, we believe, and continue on with that trajectory of success that we've had there for a long time.
Jeremiah, what qualities are most important when it comes to looking for the next head coach of TCU football?
Yeah, great question. So, someone who's currently a head coach would be where we'd start. I think you know, this is a job that, like I said, is it's much different than it was, and so, you know, we'd like someone, you know, just candidly speaking, someone that understands what the new world of college athletics look like. Talk about name, image, likeness. Talk about the transfer portal. Those things, you know, that's what the modern coach is going to have to be very adept at doing, and those are going to be important questions we ask. You know, just generally speaking, TCU is a family, and someone who shares those values that we hold so dear will also be important. So I'd start there. The process began early Monday morning, early yesterday, and we've made a ton of progress already. We're in the process of vetting candidates, and as I said, there's a lot of strong interest, and I'm very confident we're going to have an excellent coach here very soon.
With all the changes in college athletics, like you mentioned, NIL, all that, but also realignment, I mean, how critical is it that by the time that TCU kind of embarks on what the new Big 12 looks like, that they kind of are on track?
We're on track with the new coach.
Yeah, just in terms of like that TCU is in good standing as a football program as sort of the new world of college football.
Well, you'd be silly not to, you know, have that in the back of your mind, because there's, you know, I don't believe that conference realignment is over. I don't believe it'll ever be over. And you saw the effect of essentially two dominoes falling, and how, you know, that's affected the entire landscape. And so you imagine one or two more dominoes falling and what that could look like. So I don't, you know, there's television contracts that are soon to expire, Big 10, Pac-12, Big 12, and so it's very conceivable that there's more, you know, more movement to come. And so, you know, it's my job to ensure that we're always, you know, in the best position possible. So there's nothing probably more important with regards to that than our football program. So to answer your question, you know, this is a huge hire.
Obviously,
Sorry, Jerry, with the creation of the transfer portal, do you address your team to make sure that they don't leave? Because I think there's a paranoia about that with all college programs, that guys are just going to leave, and given now the uncertainty with the coaching situation, do you have to address that?
Sure, and, you know, ultimately, it's going to be, you know, their choice to stay or to go once the new coach is in place. I met with the team Sunday evening after the news came out, and I just, and I'm in the process of reaching out to them, because I want to get a chance to, you know, allow them to speak into what their experience here has been. You know, we make a lot of promises a lot of big promises to recruits, and we want to make sure that we're fulfilling those. And so a lot of this right now is you know, looking at the program, making sure we're delivering on that promise. But ultimately, you know, it's going to have to be a fit for those kids, you know, and they're going to have to understand what the coach's vision for that is before they make the decision to stay or to go. I realize that with any coaching change, you're going to have some people that are going to want to leave. And so that's just comes with it, but you'll probably have some people that will come to TCU specifically for, you know, whatever the new coaching situation looks like. So it's fluid, is what I tell you, Mac. I mean, it'd be silly to, you know, try to convince a kid not to make a decision before the new coach is here, though.
Jeremiah, was there any way Gary could have stuck around till beyond the season, or did you kind of make it clear that you weren't going to retain him?
Yeah, we made the decision to not bring him back for the 2022 season, and thank you for bringing that up, Drew. I do want to make one clarification, because this really needs to be said. There's some bad information out there, and naturally when this happens quickly, you know, you can't totally prevent that. But there was a report that I gave Gary an ultimatum to terminate Doug Meacham and Jerry Kill to retain his job, and I tell you that is 100% false. That was never presented. I know that, Gary knows that. So it's unfortunate that's out there, because Doug and Jerry are working their tails off, and that was never presented. That was never an option that Gary could have considered. So I want to make it very clear that was never. That's not accurate.
Well, and kind of going off that, you know, like a guy like Gil Brandt said, TCU should be embarrassed about how this Gary Patterson's tenure ended. I'm sure this is not what you envisioned, you know, a mid-season departure.
No, this is not what we envisioned at all, and it's certainly not what we wanted, and not what Gary wanted. So, you know, it's probably easy to say that, but you know, ultimately, we had, as I said, we have very high expectations for this program, and that's because of Gary. You know, that's the irony of it, is that he's built this program, and so we weren't meeting those expectations, and he would acknowledge that as well. So, you know, I think Mac wrote a great piece about, you know, divorce never ends well, and I think anytime a coach or, you know, a high-ranking professional leaves an organization, it's difficult to do that as well. So I think, you know, ultimately, we've done our best, and I would also say, though, that I do think there's a day, you know, one of the things we really wanted to do with Gary for the month of November was really celebrate him and honor him. And he didn't, if you know Gary, that's not what he wants. But I do believe there will be a time where we can do that appropriately, and I look forward to that. But it just wasn't in the cards to do that right now.
So in terms of one of the common criticisms is, well, it could have been handled better, right? I'm sure you've seen it, right? We should have handled it differently. To people who say that, what do you say to that assertion? What could have been handled better?
You know, I mean, it's if you weren't, it's probably a fair criticism, just because I don't think anyone wanted it to end this way. But I thought we handled this very fairly. You know, we could have gone through the season and hired a search firm behind coach's back. Would that have been fair? So, you know, what we've done here at TCU, which I'm very proud of, is that whenever we determine what's the right move or decision for the university, we then turn to what's the right and fair way to treat the employee when it deals with an employee. And I have 100% confidence we did that this time.
Jeremiah, when you talked about someone familiar with NIL, transfer portal, with you guys being in this area of DFW, hotbed for recruiting, do you guys look at someone that has strong Texas ties for the next head coach?
Certainly consideration. You know, I wouldn't say that it's absolutely necessary. You know, coaching, there's so much movement in college that it's, you know, coaches go from East Coast to West Coast in Texas, so there's probably ways that you can, you know, if the head coach isn't necessarily a Texas native, there's probably ways that you can, you know, bring support staff and assistants that have strong Texas ties. So I wouldn't say that's, you know, that's absolutely necessary. But, you know, the DFW marketplace, I think is going to be, it has shown already, but it's a big advantage for us. And so that's especially in this NIL space, I think that's something that I really want to hear, you know, our coaches vision for, you know, how we can, continue to do a better job there, because this is still evolving. NIL is something that's, it's not a, we don't even have a one set rule yet, and so, but it is gonna be very important that the new head coach has an NIL, strategy.
Jeremiah, over the last couple of days, obviously several recruits have reopened their commitment and just decided to look at other schools. How much of an effort are y'all making sure that there's not complete fallout there, or is that just something you consider inevitable given the situation?
Good question, and I have all their names and numbers, and so I will be reaching out to them just to share with them, you know, my thoughts and what I've shared with you, kind of my vision for the new coach, and also just, you know, we will honor those commitments for those that have already committed to us, but you know, we're gonna, obviously the new head coach is gonna have a big say in, you know, what their role is with the team, but I will be reaching out to every one of the commitments. I believe there are 11 so far, so they can personally hear from me and share with them my thoughts.
How much is the timing of this impacted by, like you mentioned, the early signing period? I mean, if it is February that you guys are looking to, do you think that impacts how quickly you feel you need to have a candidate in place?
Well, the December 15th deadline changes everything. When the old signing day of, you know, February 2nd or 3rd, whatever the first Tuesday was, or Wednesday, you could, it was different. You know, you could get through bowl season and you could kind of let this play out a little bit. But now that the December 15th deadline, or it's not deadline, but it really is when everyone signs, that just accelerates the process. And so, you know, we would like to have someone in place so that we can have those conversations, because that's, what we don't want to do is have, if you didn't have someone in place, you kind of miss out on one big recruiting cycle, and that's just going to hurt the program. So it was very important that once the decision was made to, you know, to make sure that we were upfront about it and get started on it.
You mentioned potentially using a search firm. What's the process going to look like for you guys to identify candidates and hire a new coach?
Yeah, so we've engaged a search firm, Turnkey, we've used before. They've been excellent. We've used them for a couple projects. And so what we'll do is we'll have a small committee here on campus, made of trustees and a couple of staff members. And so we've already started vetting candidates, and we'll get to a place where we'll hopefully have a situation where we can conduct some interviews here. But that's kind of how it'll work. The search firm will help us vet the candidates and kind of go over the criteria that we're looking for, at least initially.
Jeremiah, you guys have some guys with deep football ties on the trustees when you look at an LT or Joe Briggs. I mean, how involved will you have them, or will they be pretty heavily involved in this?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is make no mistake, and this is a huge hire. It's a huge decision, and so we'd obviously like, even though the committee may be small, it doesn't mean I'm not going to be seeking a lot of input. And those two you mentioned, LT and Joe Briggs, and there's others. Will be, you know, I can't wait to hear their thoughts and their you know, ideas they have. So no, they'll be very much engaged, and I've heard from both.
We'll go 2 more questions, and we'll go to Coach Kill.
Jeremiah, is there any focus on the schematics that a coach has? Like, are you guys looking as an offensive coach, defensive coach? Have y'all had those discussions yet?
Well, you know, I would tell you that it would be very difficult to bring in a coach who's very defensive minded, given Gary's legacy. That doesn't mean that we're not looking at defensive candidates, but I think that just to be fair to the coach, I mean, when you have an iconic Hall of Fame legendary coach who you know, is one of the best defensive minds that's ever coached in college, you know, it's going to be very difficult for that person to fill their shoes. And so, you know, I'm not saying we're not looking at defensive candidates, but, you know, I would also tell you that it probably feels at this point a little more natural to go the other way.
Jeremiah, when you look at the job marker, LSU, USC, some blue blood openings out there, where do you feel TCU stacks up with some of these other openings?
Well, just perception-wise, probably right behind them. I mean, obviously LSU and USC have won national championships more recently, but and they're two outstanding universities and great football traditions, but I don't see why we're not right there behind that.
Thank you.